Good evening, everyone. I'm Professor Murphy, and I'd like to welcome you to the third Berges lecture for fall 2015. Before I introduce our speaker for tonight, I just wanted to share with you very briefly the fact that Cummins is an excellent corporation, and I've known about them for my entire professional career, back when I was even teaching before I started my PhD program, and they've established a reputation for ethical and socially responsible business that goes back a long way. And I'll just read you a couple of things from their website that has a good summary of this. Cummins has a long history of corporate responsibility based on the framework of linking the impact on our stakeholders to responsible business decisions, and it goes back to their founding in the early 1900s. And the heritage was reflected in a statement by the CEO in the 1950s through the 70s, J. Irwin Miller. And I'd just like to read you a quote about Mr. Miller that he made. While some still argue that business has no social responsibility, we believe that our survival in the very long run is dependent upon responsible citizenship in our communities and in the society as it is on responsible technology, financial, and production performance. And Professor Enderle is sitting over here, and I wrote about Mr. Miller in an article 20 years ago. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the current CEO of Cummins, Tom Linebarger, who joined the company many years ago, but he became CEO in January of 2012. And for those of you that are not familiar with Cummins, I'm sure Tom will share more detail. They're the largest independent maker of diesel engines in the world, and he's held a number of high-ranking positions, including COO and CFO and vice presidents of several divisions. Prior to joining Cummins, Tom was an investment analyst and manager for Prudential, working both in Singapore and Hong Kong. And he worked at Cummins as an intern and was telling us over dinner that he started on the assembly line, so he knows from the very beginnings of Cummins engines to the very end of the supply chain, if you will. He's now on the board of directors of Harley-Davidson, where he served for several years, and also on Energy Systems Network. Tom grew up in California and received in the 80s a joint undergrad degree in management engineering from Claremont McKenna and Stanford University. He also has an MBA from the Graduate School of Business from Stanford. He and his wife are parents of two daughters, one of which is enrolled in one of our future opponents, USC, and another is enrolled in Boston College. So we wish you luck on those days, luck every day but those days, Tom. And you can see the title of his talk, and I'm sure it's going to be an excellent presentation. Please join me in giving a Notre Dame welcome to Tom Linebarger.
Well, thank you all. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Professor Murphy. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. My boss is also in the room, so I need to do a good job. So if you could clap heartily at the end, I'd really appreciate it. Bob Bernhard, who's your Vice President of Research, is also on our board and keeps track of my duties. This is a topic I really like to speak about, so I was very grateful to get it. I am a person who serves at the good graces of the shareholders of this company. I'm incredibly honored to be the CEO of this company. I'm the 6th CEO in the entire history of the company. And this is a company with very, very rich traditions, which I'll share with you, and a global technology powerhouse, which I have a moment in time to serve and try to make better than when I found it. And it really is a challenge and an honor. And the opportunity to do that in an ethical way is a gift that is very, very hard to underestimate. Many of you will be making business decisions about where you want to go work. And I would just tell you, if you can find a place that feeds your soul as much as it feeds your pocketbook, you win. And that's the way I feel at Cummins. So let me get started. I'm going to do, from an agenda point of view, I'm going to do an introduction of myself, an introduction to Cummins, our foundations, and how we stand today, which I think will give you an underpinning for kind of our ethical framework. And then I'll talk a little bit about what the challenges of running an ethical company in a global and changing environment, and what that takes as a leader. Try to highlight some of the critical elements that if you want to run an ethical company, things you need to keep track of, I think, to make it work out. And then, of course, we'll have some questions at the end. So that's the basic flow. All right? Am I changing or is someone changing for me? No? Okay, there it is. Okay. Sorry, that's actually never worked. Okay.
There you go.
So there we are. So just in the way of introduction, this is my mom, and me on the left and my brother on the right. I'm the one with the handsome belt up near chest level and the unkempt hair. This was in the early 70s. I grew up with my mom and my brother because my parents were divorced when I was about 6 years old. My mom was married when she was 19, and my father was working, and my mom dropped out of school to take care of me. And my brother was born 5 years later, 4.5 years later. And so by the time she was about 25 or 26, both of us were there. And unfortunately, just a year later, my parents divorced. And our household was full of a lot of conflict in those days. My dad and mom, it's hard to imagine today that they were ever married. But even at those times, there was a lot of conflict. So believe it or not, when they got divorced, it was kind of a sort of happy day in the family, at least in the near term. But my mom, after being married so young, dropping out of college, and now having 2 boys, figured out a way to bootstrap a life that's led me to be the CEO of the company. And for that, I'm incredibly indebted. She is a remarkable woman. She went back to, first of all, we went on welfare and food stamps. My mom went back to college and got her degree in occupational therapy. She had to do an internship. She had to earn enough money to feed us. And the weird thing is that in this time, we're smiling. And I love this picture because, in fact, I don't really remember feeling poor or feeling without. And I don't really know how that's possible considering how little money and stuff we had going. But what I know is that she worked her tail off to make it so. And so, from my point of view, to watch my mom kind of bootstrap the whole thing, make it all work out through sheer force of will, and also a little help, has impacted how I see the world and how I lead. And that's why I wanted to sort of take you to that picture. Second picture I wanted to show you is my nuclear family today. So my wife is in the orange sickle there, the orange and white. My older daughter, Alex, who's at USC, is in the green. By the way, Stanford beat USC this last week. I don't know if you saw that, but I actually watched that game with my daughter and really enjoyed that. My other daughter here is in the maroon there in the middle. And we're skiing at Alta here, Alta, Utah. And we go there just about every year with another couple of families. About 18 of us show up into this hotel at the base of the mountain, and we spend a week together skiing. And it's one of my favorite things I do in my life. And we've done it year after year. I took my kids up there when they were just 5 and 3, and I learned as an adult with them, oddly enough. So I was up on the top of the mountain 2 years ago with my younger daughter. And I said, "Isn't this great? I just love this ski vacation. It's just so great. Every year we get to come here. It's so fun. Don't you just love this?" And she goes, "Yeah, I like it." I said, "What do you mean you like it? It's the best thing ever." She goes, "Yeah, I know you like it, Dad. That's why we do it." And I paused there for a minute and I said, "That's why they do it. That is a lucky guy. A guy whose kids will go with them skiing because that's what he likes to do." So I felt, pretty grateful about that. Pretty feeling like I got a good thing going. And what I told people at dinner is I take all my vacation. I have a really rich family life. I have friends that I really enjoy spending time with. Not that many of them anymore, not as many as I had in college, but still some. And just that the richness of that fun and joy and love is what really allows me to kind of put all my attention and brain and effort into making this company better. So to me, that's also a big part of who I am and how I lead. And this is just to show that I do things other than things that skiing. I also do other things that they like to do. So this is my daughter and I hiking. I have a hard time keeping shoes on her. That's just the age she's at. But so I just wanted to show you that we do lots of stuff together. It's just not one thing, and that really is an important part of me. So I wanted to summarize this. I want you to start on this page over with the green circles. These are kind of the way that I say what drives me as a leader. So my ethical framework is primarily one of justice and fairness. I live in kind of a duty orientation, that I feel like the world, that those of us that have the ability and wherewithal to make the world a better place, to make it more fair, more just, where people can reach their potential, have a duty to do so. So I feel like because of my mom's hard work and because of I have some good schooling and some ability, I can accomplish things in this world, and I should use those capabilities to make it better and make it more fair and more just. So a lot of the way that I think about my leadership is how to make sure that I'm helping people reach their full potential. And I spent a lot of effort in doing that. I think hard work matters. So while my mom was working hard and really trying to keep our family going, my uncle on my father's side, unfortunately my namesake, was working 6 months and 1 day every year as a commercial painter, because if he worked that long, he could collect unemployment the rest of the year and not have to work. And so I was just kind of juxtaposing those as a teenager and thinking, I think I know where my values come down. So I really like to work hard. You know, I do like to do fun stuff, but I work really hard, and I expect a lot of myself and the people that work with me. And then fun, family, and friendships is kind of the energy that fills me and gets me back to working hard. So those are kind of the things driving me the most. This is a more normal bio introduction. I joined about 20 years ago. I'm a mechanical engineer. Believe it or not, sixth CEO, the first engineer. Cummins, who was kind of the inventor who started it, was probably not a bad engineer, but he didn't have a degree. So first degree engineer, I should say. I'll talk to you a little bit about Erwin Miller later and how he inspired me, but the truth is I came to this company not because I love engines. I do love engines, and we make good ones, but I really came here because I wanted to lead the way that Erwin Miller wants us to lead. That's why I came. And turns out, when you go around my leadership team table, most of them came for the same reason, about the values of the company, not about the products we make. And then I talked about my values. So now I want to switch to Cummins for a second. And I want to go back again to the foundation. So Cummins, believe it or not, is an entrepreneurial company founded by a venture capitalist and inventor. So the guy on the left, W.G. Irwin, was part of a family that had a bank and a general store in Columbus, Indiana. At that time, not the thriving metropolis that it is today, quite a small frontier town with one bank and one store. And so W.G. Irwin wanted to get some more customers for the store and who can put money in the bank. So he thought, better have some companies that have jobs. So he started a venture capital company and started financing venture capital. Started a bunch of companies, most of which are not here today. In fact, I think there's just one here today, us. And Plessy Cummins was the family's driver. He was a driver, handy, inventor kind of guy who had read something about Rudolf Diesel's invention in Germany of this diesel engine and how good it was, and wanted to basically get a license from MAN, bring the diesel engine over and launch it in the US. And so the guy on the left financed the guy on the right to do it. And Plessy, he was we were one of 100 companies that licensed exactly the same license from MAN during that period of time, 1919 period, not in that year, but across that period. One of 100 companies. Right now, we're the only major independent diesel engine company in the world. So little Columbus company, still around. So doing something right. So what do you do when you have a new product that's the best darn thing going, but you have an entire infrastructure that's not supporting that technology? Right? So you got gasoline stations all over and no diesel stations. You got a bunch of truck makers and bus makers who have their own manufacturing plants for gasoline engines and do not need a diesel, thank you very much. They're good to go. They've got all their own plants, do not need it. Remind you of anything current today? What I thought of as high definition television. Let's say you make the really cool controls for high definition television. You got a bunch of low-def TVs out there. You got a whole system. You got a broadcast network, and you got a bunch of TV makers that don't see what's in it for them. And then you got no programming for HD TV. That's kind of what Plessy Cummins was up against. So what do? barnstorm. You take a bus and you drive it across the U.S. for $1.78. That's how much it cost him. He drove from New York to Los Angeles in that bus, stopping at every town, honking like this. Look at us, and going through, and he did it for $1.78 to show how far it could go and how cheap it was to drive because it's fuel efficient, right? The equivalent, I guess, would be having big TV screens in the middle of Times Square and all the other cities showing how cool HDTV was. But you need to create demand. Nobody wants to make one, and you need to get somebody to want them to pull it through. So that's what he did. Here's what he did next. He made a race car with a diesel engine and took it to the Indy 500. Indy 500. So Indy 500, the diesel engine that we put in that car, Class C put in the car, made the whole race without stopping. The first and only car to ever run the whole Indy 500 without stopping. Took 5 hours and something, I think. Took 13th place, not first, 13th place. Averaged a little more than 80 miles an hour. And I think the whole thing cost $31 in fuel. So what did he demonstrate by that? Can run forever, really good fuel economy. Right? Finally, Safeway stores and another grocery chain says to their truck makers, I want my next trucks with a diesel engine. If you don't give me one with a diesel engine, I'm not buying your truck. And Cummins is born. Took him 15 or 20 years of not making money to get people to finally start ordering diesel engines. So that's the entrepreneurial journey of Cummins. Really a rich entrepreneurial history. This guy he was a promoter like there never was. Great inventor, but a promoter to get people to buy the technology. So Cummins is now in some trucks, but not that many. And down comes the next progeny of the family. So Irwin Miller is the nephew of W.G. Irwin. And this family, the Irwins and Millers, are basically a combination of business people and ministers and religious people. So when Irwin Miller went to college, he studied classics in Greek and theology. Then he went off to serve, I believe, in the Navy. He came back to Cummins after the war as a young man, I believe in his late 20s, to run Cummins. It's not a very big company at this point, right? So family says, well, why don't you run this thing? And not making that much money. But of course, this is in the 50s, so this is right before the interstate highway get built out. So he's there at the crucial moment for Cummins. And this is a guy who thinks completely differently than business people. Remember, Greeks and theology. When he was at his table growing up, what they talked about is the most important ethical questions in the world. Right? Is business even a reasonable practice for a religious person? For someone, and what role do values play in business? So when Irwin Miller came in, he felt he had a totally different approach. He wanted the company to care about values, first of all, and secondly, to think about the role of leaders as making a positive impact on society. So you heard one quote from Professor Murphy, but there's many like this. And I want to read you one that's my favorite. In fact, when I joined Cummins, I told you that this values had a big deal. I was in our career center at Stanford Business School. I was upstairs in this room, and back in those days, the career center was a library full of annual reports and weird brochures from companies. So nothing on the computer, all just paper copies of annual reports that you could read. We support the shareholders, and it's boring as can be. There's nothing in there to motivate you to want to go to work there. And then finally, I run across Cummins, and there in that brochure is a statement for Irwin Miller. I just have to read it because it's such a great quote. It says, "In the search for character and commitment, we must rid ourselves of inherited and even cherished bias and prejudices. Character, ability, and intelligence are not concentrated in one sex over the other, nor in persons with certain accents, or in certain races, or in persons holding degrees from some universities over others. When we indulge ourselves in such irrational prejudices, we damage ourselves most of all, and ultimately assure ourselves of failure in competition with those more open and less biased." So I want you to think about a CEO writing that sentence and putting it in their brochure. This is a guy who thinks differently. There's also memos that people still pull out of their drawers in the company. My old boss, Joe Locrey, who's a Notre Dame grad, used to pull this memo out and say that he got from Irwin Miller, and because he was the head of personnel, and he went and said, here's all the things we're going to do to look for really good people coming into the company. And Erwin Miller wrote him a note back that said, Joe, no, that's not what we need. We need people of character. Just look for people of character. So that's how he thought. Change the face. I mean, forever the company is influenced by this way of thinking. Thinking broadly about what our responsibilities are, meaning if we're not making a positive contribution to society, who cares what our profits are? If we're draining from society, our permission to operate will disappear. If we build a building, it should be a building we're proud of. Why can only people from Renaissance times build buildings that we're proud of? Wouldn't we want the next generation to look back at the buildings we build and say, those are great, thanks for building those? And if they're all exactly the same boring glass office tower, is that what they're going to say? So his view was that excellence in everything should be what you're striving for. Each of us should think about what excellence means to us, and that's what we should contribute to society. Totally different view. And it permeates our company today. Permeates the company. So let me talk about the company, though. So when Erwin Miller ran the company, very small, barely profitable, before interstate trucking. Then massive road build-out in the U.S., interstate trucking starts, and all of a sudden, trucks are everywhere. And Cummins benefits from that. Then in 1979, we start going global, and the next thing you know, we turn around in 2014, $19 billion. Little Columbus company, need customers for the store, $19 billion, 150 in the ranking, 55,000 employees almost globally, and 190 plus countries. Now, it's easy to write how many countries it is, 190. But just think about this. My commitment to my employees is I try to visit and talk to in person every single one of them every 2 or 3 years. That's a daunting figure to me. That's a lot of air miles to me, right? Because it's supposed to be a company that cares. When Erwin Miller was a CEO, he went on the shop floor and talked to employees regularly to make sure he was in touch with employees. Shop floors are a little farther apart now for me, but the values need to be the same. Our company has 4 divisions. This is interesting just so you get a sense of what we're trying to do, but we have a very, very deep technology focus, and our job is we want to be the best power for people in the world. So we don't do everything. We don't do hotels. We don't even do trucks. We do engines, power generation systems, and the technology that goes in them to make sure that we make the cleanest, most fuel efficient, most productive engines in the world. Very focused. So the way a small company in Columbus, Indiana gets to be a global company is you become really good at something. And this is what we're really good at. We serve a lot of different applications. So we make that engine and we try to make as few versions as we can. It's a lot of versions, but we try to make as few as we can so we can get economies of scale in engineering and production. But we try to make it fit in a lot of different things. So if it moves, pushes, carries people, carries dirt, probably we make an engine for it, right? Basically, we're in the industrial and commercial economy, not in the consumer economy. We do make a consumer product, a Dodge Ram. In fact, that's what we make an engine for a Dodge Ram. When I was first an intern, as Professor Murphy mentioned, I worked on the assembly line at the Dodge Ram factory. So if you happen to own a Dodge Ram from the years 94 and 95, I apologize right now. But so we are in a lot of different applications in a lot of places in the world. And I just want to show you this one thing before I lead to what it means now to lead a values company. This is what happened to us from an employee base. So when W.G. Irwin financed Plessy Cummins, what he wanted to do was get jobs to the young Christian men of southern Indiana so they would make some money and put money in the bank and buy stuff at the store. That's what it said on the charter of Cummins originally. Provide employment for the young Christian men of southern Indiana. I want you to see what's changed over that time. So after the interstate trucking build-out, we could tell that even in the late 60s, things were going to slow down eventually in the U.S. in terms of growth. And by the late 70s, it was evident that the U.S. trucking market was going to move to a 3 to 4% growth per year kind of market. So we started to look outside. So we did our first overseas joint ventures in the 1960s. In fact, we were already in India by that time, in the 1960s. not 2001, 1960s. We got to China in the 1980s. So within 2 years after Nixon's visit to China, Cummins had an office in the Peace Hotel in China. Office. We had a hotel room with files in the bathtub. So we were internationally very early trying to build out. But now something between 45 and 55% of our sales are overseas. I mentioned 55,000 employees, but not only that, but our workforce has become more diverse in every single respect you can think of. So we used to hire people primarily from the Midwest, for example. That's not the case. We had mostly men in our manufacturing place. Not the case. We had mostly people from the US. Not the case. When you go to Cummins today at an engineering school, and we're recruiting professionals, what you see is a long line for international students. Because we have a global workforce and we offer people the opportunity to come join Cummins, and we'll apply for a visa for them. Long line of international students. If you want to work in the US for a few years, you stand in front of Cummins if you're an engineer. I mean, things have changed a lot for our company. And what that means is the values that we want to stick with become much more challenging, because even the language that you need to speak in, even the way you need to explain it, starts to get more challenging with diversity. Because you want to be different in every way you can to benefit the customer, but you need to be one company. You need to be same in some ways. How do you do that? That's really the challenge, I think, of running an ethically based company, values-based company in a really diverse global environment. Huge challenge. That's what I wanted to strike for you. So, in 2000, I was on, my old boss, Tim Solso, was running it, and I was his CFO. And we were trying to figure out this exact question. Companies changed a lot. And we want to change it more, by the way. At that time, we wanted to drive much more towards performance. We wanted to improve our financial performance. We wanted to profitably grow. We wanted to expand faster overseas. So we wanted to increase our complexity and diversity more. And we wanted to hold on to the values that we all came to the company to live out. Again, the whole table, the reason they came there was to work in Irwin Miller's way. That's why we came here. That's why we think we're alive today and the other 99 companies are dead. So we think it has everything to do with the performance of the company, but how can we make it relevant to the 54,000 people that are here that speak all these languages and have all these different backgrounds, and make it modern language? You heard my quote from Irwin Miller. It's a beautiful quote, but it's not how you would write it today, is it? I mean, even just the language sounds old. So we had to update it. And so we wanted to make the core values the same, but we wanted to modernize and make people feel connected to these core values in a tangible way, not old, crusty pictures of Irwin Miller. It's us today. This is who we are. So let me show you what we did. We created a vision and a mission and value statement that read like this. So the vision statement is about linking together everything we do, products, people, customers, employees, and communities, and saying it's all about unleashing people to make people's lives better. Because, when you make a diesel engine, connecting to your customer is kind of a tricky issue. So what do you do to get people excited about it? You tell them you're changing people's lives, which is what you're doing. So that's what that was. But I really wanted to highlight the values. So what are the values that we pulled out of this incredibly rich tradition? One's integrity. Integrity to us means doing what you say you'll do and doing the right thing. So the memo that Irwin Miller used to send around was, if you don't want to see it on the front page of the paper, don't do it. Right? Of course, these days, you just may very well see it on the front page of the paper, at least on a blog. So it's pretty relevant today. But that's doing the right thing. But doing what you say you will do is also a really important value in business if you want to keep partners for a long time. You want to keep joint venture partners, you want to keep customers. Doing what you say you do is how they build trust with you. Innovation probably speaks for itself, but we felt like we were founded on the basis of innovation, and how we stay alive is by keeping innovation as part of everything we do. And frankly, it drove a lot of our focus on environmental leadership. Was when we got into a pinch and said, look, we have to become an environmental leader, or else we're not going to be able to be relevant anymore. We used innovation to do it. Spent a lot of money on making sure that our products were the most, the cleanest and best for meeting emissions requirements, and also the most fuel efficient. Delivering superior results, I think, also speaks for itself, but what we were trying to make sure is that people didn't think we were a company that did good, but didn't do well. Right? So doing good things and not making money for the shareholders essentially means that somebody else will be doing it pretty soon. You really can't maintain a right to do things that are important in the world if the people that invested in you don't earn a return. It's just unfortunately the criteria for staying in the game. Corporate responsibility, which is an extension of Erwin Miller's idea that you're only as strong as the community in which you live and work. So the way that you get strength and permission to keep operating is you're a positive impact on that community. And when you think about this, a lot of people have corporate responsibility programs. Some of them do what I call cause marketing, right? They'll back up, they'll give some money to an area, and they'll put posters up. I think of like a company like Dairy Queen. I used to know them because I used to visit them in Minneapolis when I lived there. And they have this thing with the Children's Hospital. It's a great deal. They give a lot of money to the Children's Hospital, and then all their stores, there's kids licking ice cream cones on their buildings. That's a nice thing to do. But in our company, what corporate responsibility means to us is that everybody in the company has an opportunity to, again, give in a way that connects them with their community and feeds their soul, not just their pocketbook. So our view is that employees, people generally, need more to life than just working and going home. They need a connection with their community that's meaningful. A lot of people have it already through another path. That's good for them. But we want to make it easy to do at Cummins. If that's something that you want to do, we want that to be easy for you. So a lot of the things we get involved with mean that our people volunteer there or work there to make them better. Diversity, which I think probably speaks for itself, but given the quote I gave you from Erwin Miller, but at its core, we believe that having more diversity means we win. If we can get people with differences and different perspective and different skills and capabilities, and we can bring them together in a team, we can unleash the power of Cummins, we win every time. I will acknowledge to you that it's more difficult. I will acknowledge to you that if everyone thinks the same as you, it's not as hard to convince them about what to do. The problem is if you have a challenging problem in front of you, you will lose. So this is a big deal for our company. It has much more to do with success of the company than it has to do with doing good. And then the last one is global involvement, and this is trying to get people to act without borders. It's more of a conceptual idea that we want people to work across borders and not get too locked down on what function they're in, what business unit they're in, what country they're based in. We want them to think about, the world's your oyster. Solve the problem for your customer across the world, not just in your little place. Don't get too tribal, if you will. And big companies, that's a real, that's basically the fall of the empire, is everybody gets really tribal and they start fighting with each other more than they fight competitors, right? That's a common failure mode. So these are the values that we're striking, that we pulled out of all this rich heritage, modernized and said, this is how we want to speak to the company. So now I'm into this critical elements. What are the critical elements for maintaining a values-based company in this modern era? And again, now we're getting to the place where this is kind of one leader's opinion. But I think you got to do three things. First is you have to build on a legacy. That's what I've been talking about all this time. So at Cummins, there's all this stuff between the walls, which is like all the reasons we came here, all the reasons our company is different than others, these strong values. So when I came, if I wrote down the values and wrote down mine and didn't link to that legacy, I lose everybody who came. You've got to build on the legacy that's there, but you have to modernize. You have to talk to the people that work at your company now. And if all the way you talk about values is with pictures of old white guys on the wall that are, look dated, and they use dated language, and no one can remember who that person is, you're in trouble. You've got to make it relevant to today. The leaders who talk about it have to talk about it in today's language, and they have to believe it in today's world. If it's not relevant, get rid of it and put something in that is. The second thing is tone at the top, and this is frequently used, by the way, in the accounting literature, and they talk about tone at the top as a prevention for fraud. But I want to broaden the concept. What I want to say here is, if you don't believe this stuff, it ain't going to work. If you run a company or you're the top leaders of the company, you have to believe this has everything to do with your success. And building alignment around that as a leadership team is the single most important thing you do. And you know, again, I consider myself a very fortunate person to be at this company because most of that work was done for me by, leaders before me. But this is a really critical point. So when we talk as a leadership team, if we make an important decision, the values of our company, those 6 I showed you, come up in every single discussion about the major issues. When we talk about who we're going to promote, we talk about the work they've done and how they do it and how it's consistent with our values. When we appoint a new officer, so the board elects officers to our company. Periodically, we have about 50, so these are the top leaders responsible for representing our company. I have a little orientation session I do for them. And I talk about what are your new responsibilities as an officer. And in there I talk about now not only do you have to live our values, but you have to demonstrate that you live our values publicly so everyone knows it. So that means no more breaking policies just for convenience. I'll give you a perfect example. We have a travel policy or an expense policy that says the senior-most person has to pay the bill at a dinner. The reason you do that is because that means that my employee can't pay for the dinner and then I just sign their check, because that allows for, you can see where that can allow for a little fraud. So what we do is the senior-most person pays, and that way somebody above them has to approve the expenses to make sure it wasn't inappropriate use of company funds. It's a little thing, right? But when you go to a big dinner and I'm there at the dinner, normally my assistant or some other handler will want to pay that bill because then I don't have to interrupt my dinner for them to pay it. I turn them away. I say, that's not the deal. I'm paying, and I make sure everyone around the table sees that I'm paying. Why? Stupid. It's because when they go to their dinner, if I don't do it, they're not going to do it. And then if they don't do it, the person beneath them is not going to do it, and pretty soon you got a bunch of non-rule followers. People basically start playing with the system, and then you're going to have expense fraud. And that's a little example, but there's just thousands of those. Everything you do speaks. And the more senior you are, the louder it speaks. People stop listening to anything you say and just watch what you do. So tone at the top is not only what you say, it's what you do and how you act out the things that you said you believe in. And if you don't do it every day, the things die this fast. It takes you 10 years to build them and 1 day to kill them. That's the way I think about tone at the top. Last one is adherence. So I promised to my bosses that I'm protecting the reputation of Cummins. Hard-earned, hard-built. I believe we have a values-based company. I tell them all those things. But 54,600 people all over the world, 190 countries, how do I know that they're actually all doing that? That they're all doing exactly what I said? That they're not bribing an official? That they're not giving their brother the business without a bid? How do I know that? There's a lot of people, right? In a lot of countries. My view is these first 2 things are fundamental, but you have to have an adherence program. You've got to have a compliance program at a modern company today. You've got to check. And this is the part that, again, sounds maybe boring, but if you don't invest in a process that says, I'm going to validate that it's happening, and when it's not happening, I'm going to take action, you lose your tone at the top. So, as they say in China, it's a long way to the emperor. So I can do whatever I want when I'm way out in the field, but they're not going to see me. And what you do is you need to see them. So what does that compliance process include? Well, first of all, it includes statements about what we care about. So we have a code of conduct statement. It's We update it every few years. We just wrote it. It's really well written. It speaks to today's world and today's people. Second of all, we have people do training regularly. So every year, our officers have to do training, and many other managers in positions of, that can do fraud have to do fraud or bribery or export controls training. So we're constantly checking these things. The last thing we do audits. And one of the things we focus on our audits is we think about what kind of ethical issues occur in this area and make sure you spend extra attention on those. So I guess what I'm getting at with this is you need to invest in a system, but you also need to never turn a blind eye. When you know there's a lot of purchasing fraud in a country, audit for purchasing fraud. It's not unfair to audit for purchasing fraud in a country where purchasing fraud's endemic. You should do it. So you have to have a compliance function, and then you have to have ways to take action. We have an investigation process where if there's any harassment, any issues of discrimination, any other kinds of things people want to report, they call a 1-800-ETHICS line, and we investigate every single call. I will tell you, many people use this to carry out personal grudges or axes they have to grind. I said many. People do that. So your natural inclination when you get all those calls is to say, oh my gosh, turn this thing off. Or just say, we're not going to address that. Our deal is, if you call, we check. Because the problem is if you don't check, the one you didn't check is the one that brings you down. And the one that makes people lose trust. So one thing I'm really proud of is in our ethics line now, more than 2/3 of the call are now people will give their name. Sounds obvious, but most calls at most companies I see, and they're anonymous, right? But they'll give their name, which means they really trust the system to say, okay, this is a real thing. So that's the kind of stuff I think you have to have in. So those would be my 3 things. And I've talked about these areas already, so I got ahead of myself, which I did in practice too, by the way. All right, so let me talk about the one example I wanted to cover, Nigeria. So let's see, it was 2005. I was a leader of the power generation division, and we wanted to expand our business, and we wanted to expand in Africa. And we were very fortunate to have on our board Carl Ware, who was used to be the head of Africa for Coca-Cola, and a lot of experience in Africa. And so I went to see him about it and asked him about, what he thought our opportunities were, and he said, have you thought about Nigeria? And I said, you bet I have, and I don't want to do it. And he said, why not? I said, it's dangerous. Yeah, he says, there's some danger, but I just read this thing about these folks in Port Harcourt where they were, tearing up this line, and there was a big kind of little small civil war between this one tribe and this other tribe, and he said, I don't want anything to do with that. And he said, Tom, that's Port Harcourt. Where are you going? Lagos. He said, that's like saying you won't go to LA because they're having a riot in Chicago. So when you read the paper, of course, you're a little bit, you kind of misunderstand. Don't have good. So I said, okay, fine, thank you, Carl. So I should go to Lagos. He said, yes, you should, go see it, and I'll have the Coca-Cola people take you around. So I did. And Lagos is an intimidating place. There's also a fair bit of crime in Lagos. But he pretty much convinced me that Cummins could set up an operation there, keep our people safe, which was my most important concern, and operate ethically. He convinced me by telling me, but then also he and I visited a couple of times. But let me tell you a couple of the considerations. And the safety thing I mentioned already was a big concern of mine and remains a concern. But the second thing is that in Nigeria, corruption in the sales process is one of those endemic problems. And what I mean by that is when we went to interview salespeople for our power generation business, our general manager there interviewed 4 or 5 people, and they came in and he said about, so he looked at their background, saw the resume, discussed our business, and then it sold them. And by the way, we don't give any bribes to purchasing managers, none. And most of them, and he said a version of this, but the quote he gave me from the second person interviewed was, wait, what else do you do? Don't know another process, right? That's just what you do. And by the way, none of them took the job. None of them wanted the job because they don't know what else to do. So we had to create an entire sales force who would not pay a bribe to the purchasing person. We had to get a facilities director that would not pay a bribe to the real estate people for getting the building. we have in our neighborhood these things called the Lost Boys, and they kind of are like the neighborhood bosses. And so if you want to drive through the neighborhood, you got to pay them. So if you have a truck with the parts, or you have a service van going out, and it sort of stops near them, they extract a bribe, or you don't get through. And sometimes they'll blockade the door to your plant. And if you don't pay them, you don't get through. So you're dealing with a lot of these kind of issues. What convinced me? I went to a meeting of a bunch of young leaders in Nigeria. Some of them were entrepreneur types, some of them were like the Citibank manager in Lagos. And I was looking at them, and they were talking to me a little bit about Nigeria. And as I listened to them on, I realized what they want to do is they want to change this place where bribery is not endemic in this way. They want to make the place, a modern, capable, based on merit kind of economy. That's what they're trying to do. And by the way, they need power. They need engines and generator sets really badly. And they need someone who's willing to sell it to them, do good service, and do it without cheating. So they need us, basically, to be there. So I decided as long as I keep my people safe, I'd go in and take a try. We're our 4th general manager in Nigeria, fired 3 for violating ethics issues. We have struggled to hire salespeople, but I would say, we're making it. We're not that profitable with up and down years, but we're making it. And I think we're going to make a difference in the country. But this is the kind of ethical kind of choices you have when you operate globally in this environment. And so we keep our values the same. If you're working in Nigeria, same 6. You can't live by the 6, you don't work for us. Same in China, same in Atlanta, you name it, same 6. That's what makes Cummins Cummins. And we think by operating that way, we succeed better than if we didn't have those. So, because it's what really links us together and lets us, unleash our entire team to making people's lives better. So that's what I've got for today, and I'm open for questions. Thank you. How are you doing time-wise? Okay.
In your career, what made you decide Cummins initially? How did you wind up with the company, and how did that grow? As you said, 20-some years. So how did that develop?
So I made my decision in that career center that day, and the guy who showed up to interview me was our head of Mexico, who was a Stanford graduate who worked for USAID before he came to Cummins, and believed in that he could win in Mexico by hiring the very best people of character and turning them to the most dynamic management team. So what he demonstrated to me is it wasn't just words on a page, it was the way they lived. I came and did my internship and fell in love with the company. My next step was trying to convince my wife that moving to Indiana was a good place, a good thing to do. My wife grew up in D.C., and I grew up in California, and her father worked for the State Department for years, and he called Indiana flyover country, which was not that helpful, really, to convincing my wife. But she eventually came and worked for the company in our corporate responsibility area and was convinced it was a great place to work. So that's where it started. I'd say what's helped me stay with the company is, again, just that mix between doing what I think matters in the world and doing, working for a company that's technically terrific and relevant to the world. So it's both doing good and doing well together, I think, is a unique opportunity. I would just add that, since I've been at Cummins, I had challenge after challenge. Each time, my next job was one that I kind of had to suck in because it took my breath away. And that was the way to keep me. Just keep me challenged in that way made me want to come back every single day. I still love working there.
Outside of always paying the bill, what else do you do to set your phone at the top? How do you get it to buy?
Yeah, it's a great question. So again, a couple things. With every major decision, I make sure we talk about values in a public way as I can. With my team in the room, public way as I can. Second thing is, at orientation, myself or one of our senior leaders, this is when you first start coming in your first week with Cummins, me or another one of my leadership team will talk to you about why values are critical to our company. So you won't even make it through the front door without hearing from a senior person that it matters a bunch. Third is, When I choose my leaders, I choose on values as much as I choose on functional performance. When you get to be an officer, I talk to you about values and demonstrating values again. We have examples in our company where people, I would say they were pretty good on the values, but there was usually one or two where they weren't so good on. The biggest one is they were kind of a jerk and didn't treat people well. And they would survive for a while their numbers were great, maybe a couple years. And then as soon as they miss their numbers, they're gone because nobody wants to back them up. So really, how you treat people, how you act relative to these values is really how you make it in our company. And again, it's not being about nice, because remember, delivering superior results is in there. Being nice is a good thing, by the way. I wouldn't knock it. But it's more than being nice. It's really about what you do and how you do it as a combination. And the how is what I'm trying to emphasize is important. And again, the more you think about solving a problem globally across so many places, the more you have to establish what your unifying theme is. People don't unify around shareholder value. It's just too ethereal. I don't even know what you're talking about. I mean, the finance people are all fine, but nobody else even knows what you're talking about, right? So you have to find something to get people to get excited and unified about, because they start from different places, right? They came out of the slums of Mumbai or the rich houses in the Upper East Side, and they're coming from all over the place, all different backgrounds, and they're coming to work for you. So where they started is nothing like where you started. And they're coming here to try to make, to turn into a great employee, and you want to keep them and drive them towards becoming all they can be here. What are you going to grab them with? It's got to be something that speaks to them as a human, not as a financial person or an engineer only, or as a whatever salesperson. You got to touch somewhere else. And I think that's where these values really start to grab people. And again, they don't grab everyone. I don't mean that, but I think the people that come here, this is what grabs them, makes them want to stay, and makes them want to play our way.
Yeah, how did you gain traction in Nigeria? You talked about finding people that want to make the country better. Of course, there's lots of people in Nigeria that want to do that, but typically they're the ones that are not in power and the ones that are in power who want those bribes. I feel like you don't want to give that bribe to that real estate guy that wants to sell you the land. You can't build a power station, so all of a sudden you have this kind of stuff in the mud.
Yeah, exactly. This is strictly the balance. I mean, in each case, you have to decide, is there business that you just don't want to do? And if there is, are you willing to take the consequences of that? And so in Nigeria, traction would be an exaggeration of what we have there. We have a business. It's not losing money. It's progressing. But we're 5% market share, not 45. And I think it's moving up is going to be hard while the country transitions, because we just we do almost no business with the government. It's almost impossible. It's hard. I would just say it's hard. I would say we lose a lot of business. And again, I feel like it's a good thing to do, and I think we're making money, and we're making more money each year, and it's getting better. I just wanted to point out that exactly what you just said, that if you are going to go into some of these places, you are going to have to decide what your limits are. Another great example of that is, in some countries, the rule of law operates a little differently, in the sense that there'll be a law in the books but not enforced. So what do you do? As an American company, if there's a law on the books in a country but they're not enforcing it and no one's doing it, are you going to do it or not? Because you say you're going to obey laws, right? That's in nearly everybody's value stuff will be, we obey all laws. How about this one? It's a tricky one, right? And especially when it's subtle. Like the law says this, but people are kind of doing that. Practices are a little different, and it's going to cost you money. What are you going to do? So many cases, cases that people most know about our history is that we exited South Africa when we were the majority supplier of engines. Daimler-Benz replaced us and is still the largest supplier of engines in South Africa. We left because we didn't think we could do business there and be a constructive engager in what we thought the change that needed to happen. But other people made different choices. They thought by staying in there they could make a bigger difference as a participant. So these these kind of decisions are important to make and require judgment and thought and careful. The thing I would say that I think is most important is to be self-aware of what you're using to make the decision. Are you making the decision financially and then justifying with your ethics, or are you making the decisions ethically and then figuring out what the consequences are? And I think you need to do the latter. I think you need to make the decision ethically and then figure out what the consequences are, because the ex post rationalization will not lead you to a good ethical place that you can live with.
One last question.
Okay?
So you talked about keeping your values relevant to today. So how have you seen the values of Cummins evolve since you first started?
Here's what I would say. The core values, if I go right to the core, they're pretty much the same. Not that much change. Most of the change that I would put in this category of modernization. What do I mean by that? I mean trying to make it speak to people that are in the business today, how to make it sure we're talking about global and not North America, how to make sure we're talking about dimensions of diversity that we face today, not just dimensions. I mean, in the day that Erwin Miller was talking about was mostly about racial diversity and a little bit about gender. Today it's international diversity, it's sexual orientation, it's all kinds of other diversity that Mr. Miller wasn't dealing with. And so you need to deal with all these different things now, and you need to be able to speak to all those. So you're basically extending the values into places which fit the world that you live in today, which is just different than the world you lived in then. And especially, as I was showing, with its complexity and the number of elements of diversity you're dealing with. That's, I'd say, the biggest element. Most of the others are kind of how making sure the language is modernized and people understand what we're talking about. Maybe one more. There was one. Sorry about that. One more. I feel bad. Yeah, I was thinking that one might show up. So obviously, I don't know that much about the details of their violation, but it sure looks bad. We live in this world of trying to meet regulations, and just think about it this way: that you're pushing yourself technically to try to give customers the best fuel efficiency while meeting the regulations on criteria emissions. So when you buy a car or a truck, you're willing to pay $0 for lower criteria emissions, right? You look and you say, you look at all the features. One of them is not how you doing on criteria emissions. Are you lower than the standard? And you just want to make sure it's legal. I mean, I don't know for you personally, but generally speaking, that's the case. So every one of us is pushed against that technical limit. And so this is where the action is. This is what we spend all of our money doing. And I would say that Volkswagen, I'm sure we're trying to do the same thing. Why they chose to take the strategy of that they did, I just don't know. But my guess is the technology stuff is pretty complicated, but the ethics don't look good at all. And we'll see what happens with it. But on its face, it sure looks troubling. Yeah, and again, I would just say to you that the decision that they had to make there, you will inevitably, if you're a leader of a company, be forced to make a decision that could end up in a place like that. And most of the time when I see these decisions and I look back, it's not one big one. It's not, should we cheat or should we not? It's a set of small ones that leads to a waterfall that makes you look at this thing and say, how did I end up here? And it's the slippery slope you went down that caused you the problem. It's why I think you need to ask yourself the ethical questions at each choice, at each place, and say, am I answering this question from an ethical place first and seeing what the consequences are, or am I trying to get a certain set of outcomes and post-rationalizing? Because if you do the second, down the slope you go, and next thing you're standing in front of a congressional hearing, which is a bad place to be. Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it.